Hello and welcome to another episode of SyrupCast. My name is Daniel Bader, and as always, I'm joined by Douglas Soltys, whose position in his apartment has changed since the last time we've spoken. Behind him is a beautiful bookshelf,
I
which
mean,
I
like
believe.
Matthew McConaughey at the end of that space movie.
Yes.
Just
What?
trapped,
In his
just
pod?
trapped in the pod.
Trapped in a pod?
We have to go back.
Is that
Go
the R.
back to a
Kelly
month
of
ago.
podcast? Wait, which Matthew McConaughey movie? Are you talking about Interstellar?
Interstellar, yeah.
Oh, okay. Because he was he's been in. Oh wait, no, I was thinking of Matt Damon. He's been in two movies, Interstellar.
Matt Damon was also in Interstellar, yeah.
Yeah. But Schmoiler alert, Martian was the better movie, I think.
I didn't see it, but hey, 50-50 survival rate in outer space, Matt Damon.
Cool. So we've been gone a while. Let's recap everybody on what's happened.
Kyle Lowry's going to be player of the month. That's for sure.
Yes. Russell Westbrook, maybe?
They do an East Coast and West Coast.
Oh, okay. So then probably. I don't know. There's been a few players doing really well. Didn't what's his name? LeBron just passed Reggie Miller on the all-time scoring list last night during the Raptors game that we beat them in?
Maybe. He passed a few. He passed a few people. I think he's only he's one of three players to be in the top 25 in points and assists.
Yeah.
It's like him, Oscar Robertson, and I don't know who the third person was.
I want to say Karl Malone or John Stockton. One of the Jazz. Oh no, John Stockton didn't hit that much.
He wasn't a pointy dude, but yeah, no. It was like I want to say Magic. I was actually surprised Magic wasn't in the top three. Maybe it was just Jordan. Maybe it was like Jordan, Oscar Robertson, and
I mean the like this has been a very interesting season so far. I mean, just based on the fact that the Warriors have gone unbeaten for 16 games. Oh. Steph Curry is playing he's playing better than he was at the end of last season.
Yes.
And he was playing probably one of the best I've ever seen. I don't think I'm like you in the sense that I follow basketball religiously, and I haven't done it for a long time. I've sort of only gotten into it in the last couple of years. But would you say that Steph Curry has the potential to be one of the best players of all time?
Oh, most certainly. I think he's demonstrated. I think there's literally no player when I look at him that I've ever seen play like that. Other than I see one component in Steve Nash, and then everything else is just it's like Steve Nash moving around, his dad's stroke only better, and then a bunch of other things that no players like. The New York Times just wrote a piece comparing him to a ballerina in terms of body control this week. That's where we're at with this. They're just what not only are you historically great as a sportsy person, but you're doing stuff like other supreme athletic talents. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting the amount of athleticism that goes into being a point guard in the NBA is, beyond reproach on its own. But being able to control an entire court, being able to see and anticipate where your teammates are going to be. I mean, it doesn't hurt that he's got, probably the best starting five in the last 5 or 10 years.
Well, they're historically great.
Antonio certainly had a rivaled the Warriors starting lineup 3 or 4 years ago. But I mean, just the improvement seen in guys like Green and Iguodala. Well, Iguodala is not new, but who's the other guy?
Curry is, as Zach Lowe says, is the straw that stirs the drink. He's the glitch in the Matrix.
He's the glitch in the Matrix.
Yeah. That's how Zach Lowe described. Shout out Zach Lowe. Married to a nice lady from Toronto.
Who?
I don't know. I just know she's from Toronto.
What, Steph Curry or Zach
No,
Lowe?
Zach Lowe. Zach Lowe.
Oh, who is Steph Curry married to?
uh, Mrs. Curry. I'm not sure.
Anyway, oh, Klay Thompson. I forgot about Klay Thompson and Harrison Barnes. Oh, that's just it's such a good lineup. Oh my goodness. Anyway, let's probably talk about tech.
Okay, if we want to make this a tech podcast, all of a sudden, sure.
Well, the last time we talked, we were in the midst of the World Series. Sorry, no, it was before the World Series. We were actually talking about the Jays. The Jays were still in it, and I don't know. I mean, there were some highs and some awesome lows, but I just want to give a shout out to Jose Delgado. Oh my God, Jose Delgado.
You are the least sportsy sports. You're like half sports.
I'm the right half. I'm the half full sports. Jose Bautista, who wrote in the Players Tribune about his awesome and
bat flip.
Very memorable bat flip, and he actually linked to an article that Mobile Syrup wrote about the Game 5 stats that were the highest ever seen on Sportsnet. It was something ridiculous.
Yeah, like 1/5 of Canada was watching that game or something.
Yeah, it was incredible. For a channel that's not standard on every sports package or every television package, that's pretty fantastic. So the Jays lost. The Raptors are doing well.
And then a bunch of things came out. A bunch of tech companies released tech.
Yeah, and I think there was a big pad that I can't really remember what the name.
ProPad.
I think it's the propane pad or something like that. But so since the last time we talked, we sort of everything that was announced at the time has been released. The propane pad is available with its Apple Pencil.
The privacy's out.
Your privilege has been checked, and the Nexi have come and gone. So let's talk about the privilege. BlackBerry released the BlackBerry Priv in I believe late October, and so far, it's been a success, I would say, right? You were telling me about a friend of ours who was at a carrier store, and while he was there talking about some other things, 4 people came in and bought BlackBerry Privs.
Yeah, like while he was there, just moving the units. Now, that's a caveat of like one store and a very, with great emphasis, a Canadian store. But it seems like the interest around this phone, while the noise around this phone wasn't bigger than, say, like the Classic was, because it didn't have that name that harkened back to like the heritage of BlackBerry, and it has a much more ridiculous name and marketing campaign. It seems that the interest around the phone was a lot higher, obviously just because it's an Android phone, right? Albeit, and I think you talked about this, a pretty expensive Android phone.
Yeah, I mean, the interest around the Priv has been incredible, and that's in no small part due to the fact that it is probably the most interesting BlackBerry to be released in the last couple of years, but one of the most interesting Android phones in general to be released in 2015. So, when you look at it, this is a phone that only BlackBerry could have built, and they really rode the wave of leaks and teasers and things like that up until its release. And for all of their marketing foibles, I think they did fairly well with the actual release itself. They got enough devices into people's hands, but they've also held back inventory to create an artificial demand. They've really pushed, they've done really well in the past with celebrities, and they've done that again. So, they pushed this into Kim Kardashian's hands. And I think Drake, I know Obama got one. So
I was watching Drake closely at the game last night. While the game was on, and I think he was using a BlackBerry, but I wasn't sure which phone it was, just trying to detect, like, while he was texting on the sidelines. But
I can't imagine he wouldn't be using a Priv if he had a phone to use from BlackBerry.
Yeah, he gets a lot of things though, but I think he was, previously he was using like an older iPhone. Got a bunch of things, but yeah. So like, I don't know. But let's get into the meat of it, because every time BlackBerry pulls out a major release, like this is definitely the most interesting phone since the last interesting phone they released, the Passport, for a couple different reasons. Obviously Android, but then also a form factor and a user interface that we haven't seen since BlackBerry 7. Like legitimately.
And the Torch.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Torch was really interesting.
I'm thinking that the Torch, that was like BlackBerry 6. I think the BlackBerry 7 one didn't even have a. Oh no, maybe I'm getting that wrong. There was a BlackBerry 7 Torch.
Yeah, there was a BlackBerry 7 Torch.
They just called called the full touchscreen one a Torch as well, because the Storm name was a tire fire of brand sentiment.
Well, there were 2 generations of Torches.
Yeah,
and the second one was a far better product. But I think this, what BlackBerry's strategy with this was, how do we create an Android phone that has immediate potential with our loyal customer base?
Mm-hmm.
So
that just doesn't look like another Android phone, right?
But it couldn't look like another Android phone, and that would have been something. But it needed to look like a BlackBerry, and this does. It has a very distinctive design. I think it's got something of a beautiful industrial design. It has the slider mechanism is remarkable in its smoothness. And overall, they've done a really good job fitting that keyboard underneath the screen, given the thickness constraints they had with it. This is by far the thinnest keyboard they've ever built. And it's not a great keyboard. It's actually, when you compare it to the Classic or the Passport or even the older Bolds that were narrower, this is not a great keyboard. The travel and the keys isn't perfect. The height of the keyboard is limiting. So, your thumbs kind of, I mean, I've got fat thumbs, but your thumbs always hit the top of that ledge where the slider mechanism ends. And that's probably just because they didn't want the phone to be unusably tall when the screen was up. But overall, they did a fantastic job within the constraints of a 5.2 inch smartphone, or whatever it is, 5.4.
Yeah.
I mean, you've played with it a little bit, right?
Yeah, but like I would say that is probably like the most awkward device to hold. It is more awkward than the Passport for me to hold as a device. It's more awkward to hold than the original Torch.
Awkward how? Like when the keyboard is open, you mean?
Yes. Well, but even then, the waterfall edge and then the sharp, it doesn't feel good in the hand. It's too wide for me. Now I'm not a phablet dude, so like take that caveat. But I just,
yeah, I don't know. I disagree there. I think that I've been using bigger phones almost exclusively since the Note 5 came out earlier in the summer. So I would say that I haven't gone back to using a phone under 5.5 inches. So the Priv actually feels small to me, and it feels really usable in one hand. And I don't think you need the keyboard. That's one of the benefits of this phone. The Android keyboard that they've developed is quite good on its own. So you can use the keyboard as a trackpad or a keyboard itself. Like BlackBerry's done a great job adapting the native Android mouse interface. So there's like an actual mouse API that was released years ago. Like there's a framework that developers can use to tap into when a mouse and keyboard are connected via Bluetooth to the Android operating system. And they've tapped into that with the keyboard to allow you to use it as a trackpad. It doesn't always work really well. Some apps invert the scrolling direction. So naturally you scroll down by swiping up on the trackpad, but some apps invert that. So the Facebook app, for instance, you actually have to swipe down to scroll down, which is a little bit disconcerting. So there's no consistency there, and that's because developers didn't really anticipate this being a popular use case.
Because it's a clutch. It's now BlackBerry has entered fully the problem that every other Android OEM has, which is when they try to innovate on top of the core platform and not owning the platform, there's consistency issues, right? And I think, it's so friggin' weird that whenever BlackBerry releases a smartphone, we end up talking about the hardware, the keys, when probably the more interesting thing about this phone is the software. Not only what BlackBerry has done to keep their security message, but then in the fact that this is basically a stock Android device that has BlackBerry's core apps kind of like plugged into it that you can kind of check on or check off. So I'm just wondering, like, having used those on both BlackBerry 10 and now on Android, does that experience transfer? Because I know some people were having like issues with speed and reliability, like the hub isn't really hubbing the way it should on BlackBerry 10.
Well, they can't make the hub the same way on an Android. They don't have access to the underlying operating system. They can't force the OS to recognize the hub as a central repository for all of your emails and texts and incoming notifications. But what Android allows developers to do is build on top of its native notification framework. But when you sign in for the first time to the hub, it doesn't automatically disable incoming emails from other apps. So what people will likely notice is they'll get dual notifications. They'll get hub notifications for their email, and they'll get Gmail notifications for their email. And for a lot of people, it's going to be very confusing. And the easiest way to do that is just to disable the hub, not disable Gmail.
So is the best Priv experience the one where it's the least BlackBerry, where it's just kind of a stock Android with a keyboard?
No, I think the hub's actually a really good option for most people. The problem is that not enough apps tie into it. So you get a great email experience, you get a decent SMS experience, but when you get an incoming SMS, it actually kicks you to your native SMS client to reply. So you're bouncing back and forth.
Yeah. But to that point though, but that's not like a support flaw. That's a design flaw, because going in, BlackBerry knows it's going to be like that, right? And I know that, and I don't think we've heard anything about it since the announcement, but BlackBerry announced their like enterprise portfolio suite, like, all Android devices will eventually be able to run all the BlackBerry core applications. But like, it's just, the phone just seems like a giant camel to me. I don't want to use, it's like a lot of compromises and half measures and things that don't work. Like, we talked about, did I actually ever end up writing that? But just the idea that like BlackBerry should be the next, and maybe this could be the transfer or the transition, the next Nexus maker. Cause then like BlackBerry could work with Android and like really go core.
No, you didn't write about it, but we talked about it on a podcast. And I bet you $100 that it wouldn't be the next, or I bet you that it would never be a Nexus maker. And we'll see if I'm right about it. But what I will say is that BlackBerry has used Android relatively well without ruining what makes stock Android enjoyable to use. But I reviewed this after I reviewed the Nexus 6P, and I talked to a lot of security experts, and what I'll say is that the software additions that BlackBerry brings to the table are not remarkable in any way. They are a decent calendar, a decent contact app, a decent email hub. It has a task manager. The camera app's okay. Like, there's nothing about the Priv that makes, from a software perspective, that makes it stand out. And after using
except for the security, right?
but that's not even true either, because the Nexus 6P is built on Marshmallow, which has some serious user level hardening when it comes to protection against vulnerabilities. It has a framework in place that allows Google to update the core operating system with security patches every month.
Mm-hmm.
So BlackBerry coming out and saying that they've hardened Android in a number of ways, and I have a list here, they are not unique anymore.
Yeah. Well,
Samsung's
then also
done similar things.
BlackBerry even came out and said that it was, the reason why they waited so long to release an Android device, which, grains of salt flowing into my mouth right now, is because it wasn't until Lollipop that they had the hooks to get into more of a, not like boot level access, but some sort of at least check there to see if the device had been compromised.
Right.
That I think Android has been slowly opening up their security, because they made security, I guess, a significant priority in the past year and a half, 2 years.
Right. So what BlackBerry says, which is, I'm assuming, accurate, is that they've made improvements to places that neither Google nor the core Linux kernel have focused on. So Google's kind of user space / boot sequence, they've added elements to it that Google doesn't consider a priority. But at the end of the day, we're still going to wait 6 months or so for the Priv to get Marshmallow. And
but BlackBerry's committed to matching like the monthly security report, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. But there are, and neither of us are security experts, and I'm going to get, the guy who reviews our podcast, love you, Dan. He's
who reviewed a podcast that you were on that wasn't even our podcast, which is the best part.
True story. But what I will say is that it would be nice to get a security expert on the pod. But I did speak to one before my review from a Toronto-based security company, and what he said was that a lot of the there's a lot of signs within the hardware and within the kernel that BlackBerry intended to make more changes, more security changes to the Priv than they actually did. And there are intimations that down the road with Marshmallow, they will harden Android the way that they initially promised. Mm-hmm. But right now, as the Priv stands, it's an entire year behind the user space improvements to Android because it runs Lollipop and not Marshmallow. And the actual Linux hardening is not as significant as BlackBerry claims.
Yeah, but don't talk to me about you're behind on Android when most people don't have Lollipop anyway. Like,
you're right. No. Well, you're absolutely right. So most people buying this are ahead of the game. But what I say, and what I've continued to say, and this will help us transition, is that the Nexus is the best product that you can buy right now if you want an Android phone. And a year ago, that wasn't true. The Nexus 6 was a bloated mess that ran a buggy operating system with a terrible camera. And this year, the Nexus 6P is probably my favorite Android device ever. And they've cleaned up a lot of the problems, both on the hardware and software side. And it makes suggesting buying any other Android phone, not just a Priv, considerably harder. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'll say to that. The Priv is a great phone. It's got a lot of things going for it. And if you
is it actually a great phone, or is it just a good phone?
No, it is a great phone. It's got a
make the case for me spending the money on a Priv over, say, a Moto phone.
No, and I can't do that. I mean, that's the thing. The only reason to buy a Priv right now is if you're company wants you to have a BlackBerry product in its portfolio because it wants there to be a synergy between your smartphone and the BlackBerry Enterprise service. So what I will say is that the Priv has access to a lot of the features on BES 12 that only BlackBerry 10 devices have. So if you run just an Android phone in general, BES will be able to support it, but based on BlackBerry's documentation, it's not as comprehensive.
So they have deeper hooks.
Yeah, which makes sense, right? The other thing is that it's FIPS 140-2 compliant. Yeah. So the cryptographic libraries that encrypt the phone against brute force and other kind of man-in-the-middle attacks are significantly stronger. But the reality is that the latest Nexus phones and what Google recommends OEMs encrypt the content on their current devices with is still 256-bit encryption, right? So
yeah, but the whole reason why people bought BlackBerries in the first place is because there are extra layers of security that certain industries, whether it be every time we go to a BlackBerry event, they talk about the regulated industries have additional requirements for data security. And that's what BlackBerry has always built to. So now people can get that on an Android phone and not feel like they're missing out on apps or things like that. So
But who is that device for? Because
it's for the same people it's for the same people that BlackBerry was always for before smartphones became a mass consumer device.
But so here's the reality right now. BlackBerry sold 800,000 or recognized the revenue from 800,000 phones in the last quarter with an average sale price of $240. So we see the phones like the Leap and the Z10 and the Z30 and cheaper phones,
shovelware,
that are going to be thrown at those regulated industries in bulk because of all of those benefits to the BlackBerry ecosystem, right? But this is a $900 phone.
Yeah.
Right?
No, you're not deploying the Priv across your enterprise. But you can give the CEOs Privs and deploy the other stuff, right?
But that's not enough.
It's not more than what they've got.
Is it?
It's probably a better proposition than HTC's. It's at least an underserved market in the Android space.
What, the CEO? The CEO has an iPhone, dude.
I would say regulated industries is an underserved market on Android.
Sure, but that, I think we'll obviously see in December when they come out with their Q3 results whether they actually found success with the Priv. Yeah. But it's a $700 phone. There's very little carrier support in the US, and even with significant carrier support in Canada, it's a $400 phone on contract.
Yeah.
And there are problems with it. It's just the core functionality is not as robust as you'll find.
I think you gave the camera a little bit more of a pass than I would for a camera, but
I liked it. I think the camera's good, but the reality is that it's the same camera, same module as the Moto X Play, and the Moto X Play is a $400 phone.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to talk more about the Nexus because you say it's your favorite?
Yeah, I like the Nexus. I've been using the 6P for a while. I think Huawei hit the nail on the head with its design. The size is good. The phone is fast. Its battery lasts forever. The camera's great. And it's my favorite Android phone I've ever used. It's just a fantastic overall device that has very little compromise. And that's kind of my review. Like phone hardware is kind of boring now. There's really not a whole lot of iteration year over year, and we've reached.
Well, there's continued iteration, but
even the iteration is slowing down. I mean, we've the maturity that you see is such that the 6P, as long as it's supported by Google, will last as long as the 5 did. You know, I see people still using the Nexus 5 2.5 years later. You know, I see people using iPhone 4S's and iPhone 5s 4 or 3 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because the software is being it's being kept up to date. Bugs are being fixed.
Well, or anyone using a 4S or something made a commitment a long time ago to never update their iPhone so that they could keep it functioning the way that they like.
Okay, but what I mean by that is phones now last 4 years. They can last 4 years. They may not be fantastic 4 years later, but there are, you know, the components inside the phones are not becoming obsolete nearly as
Oh
quickly as
yeah,
they
no,
used
we
to.
did it. Phones are a commodity. We did it. Full stop. Like you're totally right. Like
And I wrote this up yesterday. The fact that there are devices on the market in Canada right now, one of which is the Galaxy S5 Neo, which is essentially a new phone. It was announced in August of this year, but for all intents and purposes, it's the exact same phone as the Galaxy S5. Samsung swapped out the Qualcomm chip inside of it for an Exynos chip, but everything else is the same. And they're passing it off as a mid-range phone. LG's doing the same thing with the G3. Once the G4 came out, the G3 got removed from the market, basically disappeared, and then came back as a mid-range phone on flanker brands like Kudo and Fido, and it sells for $400.
yeah.
It's
So
essentially
a cheaper. So they put a cheaper chip in essentially old inventory, get scale and eke out more revenue.
yeah, and it's because those phones, if you buy them today, will last for 2, 3, 4 years.
Well, it's like to be honest, it's a slight variation on Apple's product strategy where
Oh,
they
it is exactly Apple's strategy.
where they
And it
sell
works
through
beautifully.
older phones as the lower tier phones, right?
What's so interesting right now is that if you go to Rogers.com and you go to their Black Friday deals,
Which
the
we
phone,
posted a junk ton of deal information on Mobile Syrup today, right? So if you're looking for the sweet Black Friday, Cyber Monday, hit that up.
yeah, and I'm gonna get this pod up on hopefully on Thursday, so you'll have a few days if you haven't seen that post yet. But the first phone that you see on the Black Friday deals isn't the iPhone 6 for $100 or the iPhone 6s for $200. It's the iPhone 5s for $0, right? People want a free phone. They don't want to spend money on a phone. So
Hey, 5S is a
Rogers,
dope phone. Got Touch ID.
it's a good phone. It's not the best phone anymore, but for most people who want a free phone and want to sign up, and don't want to spend anything on a new phone, then it's a great upgrade.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And this is a way for Rogers to sell a crap ton of phones over the Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend. So
Totes.
what that says is that as we cover new devices as the new hotness, for many people, they kind of just want a phone that makes phone calls and runs Facebook fairly well. And the
Well,
5S,
they want a phone at their price range, and now the phones at their price range are no longer embarrassing phones, but just older versions of great phones.
well, they're versions of great phones that are older.
Yeah. So then, well, when we were talking about what to talk about on the pod, there have been some newer ideas in terms of hardware and some things that have come out. Do we want to talk about what's exciting us in terms of what's been released?
Totally. I'm looking here at
Because apparently laptops are out. Laptops are shit, and tablets are cool, and tablet tops are even cooler than tablets.
tablet tops. That rolls off the tongue.
The tablet top.
So I think the reality is that nobody's going to be giving up their laptop for an iPad Pro unless they have thought about how to give up a bunch of the functionality that they take for granted on their laptop. But what I posited in the iPad Pro review is that you can get about 90% of the way there today, and that with updates, you'll probably get 95% of the way there. It depends what you do, but the iPad Pro is a very, very powerful product.
So what are you getting back for what you give up then?
Battery. You get a ton of battery. You get like 2 days of battery. You get like 18 hours of use from this thing. It's insane.
Really? Because my Haswell MacBook Air has got battery for days.
No, it doesn't. It has battery for hours.
It's the same battery life as the Pro. Are you kidding me? I got 11 to 13 on this thing, son.
Sure you do.
Now, that's not while doing video editing or any processor intensive stuff. That's me in a Word editor. And obviously the Pro is designed to be a content creation tool for sure. But I think when it comes to stuff like this, people get really caught up in like the whole keyboard hybridy thing. And what I'm more interested in is the construction of workflow. And I was actually just doing some mentorship with a startup earlier today, right before we recorded, where they're building a product. Their little software tool is a Chrome extension, and it's just about helping teams be more productive. And the reason why they chose the browser and an extension to do that rather than an app is because from a desktop environment, the vast majority of people live and work in the browser.
Mm-hmm.
All their services are browser tabs, even if they also come as apps. When it comes to hardcore content creators on desktop, so video production, animation, enterprisey stuff, usually super app based. The iPad Pro is powerful enough to run those apps, runs them beautifully, and has a super sensitive touch interface for it, with a ridiculously named product that is fairly expensive, but at a professional grade, right? Yeah, so the problem with that is the types of software normally run by those people doesn't really relate well to an app store model, when it's usually subscription fees or like $300 up front. That does not work in an app store where that incentivizes a race to the bottom for pricing.
100%. And I, so that,
or even continuous updates that have to be faster than what an intermediary approval system, or the idea that the enterprise software that we rely on has a bug in it and we can't get an update for it because the app store has a code freeze and they didn't get their update in time or something.
Right. And it's Thanksgiving and the App Store team is eating turkey, so they can't approve our bug fix.
Counting their money.
Totally. So yeah, I agree. The iPad Pro is full of potential that is let down by the App Store model. What I will say is that there are some examples of successful products, notably by Adobe. And Adobe actually they laid the foundation for a successful iPad model with its Creative Cloud by allowing you to spend $99 a year for all of its products, and you can access them on the desktop, on your smartphone, and on an iPad. And each of those screens gives you something a little bit different. So the products that they've developed for the iPad Pro are wholly optimized for the pencil. They are incredibly versatile as sort of blank screens that you can use to create whatever you want. But at the end of the day, most, I think, professionals, if we use the term, would start or end on the iPad Pro. The middle is not going to be done on the iPad Pro, right? They're going to create something on the desktop and then give it a little bit of a massage with the pencil. And I think that, that kind of applies to the model in general, right? Like I can, one of the strangest oversights with the iPad Pro is that you can't, or with iOS 9 in general, is that you can't use two Safari browsers side by side. So, with the iPad Pro, you have this enormous 12.9-inch screen, You got a very fast processor, 4 gigs of RAM, but you
Well,
can't have two
but
browser
here's
tabs side by
but
side.
here's again the break, right? Where in this professional environment where sometimes you require apps, the web still rules, but now you're running it on a mobile platform that for years has disincentivized the web in favor of apps, which is how Apple makes money.
Yeah.
So we're like at the singularity point of desktop and mobile OS overlap with these hybrid devices. And, Microsoft is like basically giving you a desktop OS on mobile hardware. And then Apple is giving you a mobile OS on a super powerful like desktop hardware.
Well, yeah. So,
And that
you know,
creates all these sorts of conflicts.
yeah, I agree. I rely on Dropbox for a lot of my stuff. And one of the main frustrations was the lack of a taskbar. I mean, I know this sounds weird, but the iPad Pro doesn't have a taskbar. So I can't drag and drop things. Like a lot of what I do is I take images from the web and then I drag them into a folder on the taskbar and then use that folder to then, you know, upload stuff back to our CMS or,
Just auto sync. Yeah, totally. All
just
those little
that
quick
those background
productivity. Yeah.
processes.
The
And it
reasons why
takes
people
no
have
time.
desktops.
And it takes no time at all. And it's very intuitive. And on the iPad, I found it possible to do that even in a web browser. We use WordPress as our backend for mobile Syrup, and it's optimized for the iPad. You can upload photos and you can access files from iCloud Drive if you need to, but it's so cumbersome, especially since there is very little keyboard support built
Yeah.
into iOS 9. So
Yeah.
a lot
So
of the
like if
things
you
that
want to
I've
read like Gurman, not Gurman,
Gruber.
Gruber went long and deep on all the ways in which uh, iOS does not support keyboards in the way that the desktop does. And I don't want to talk about keyboards anymore because we've already talked about like BlackBerry was our keyboard fill of the day. This keyboard conversation brought to you by BlackBerry, privilege and privacy.
Money.
But it's just another example of this overlap where, there was an obvious use case for mobile smartphones, smaller tablets. There was a readily, or not a readily apparent, but initially grasped upon use case for lean back on your lap, sit back, consuming content. And now we're getting to the point where they're trying to further stratify their hardware products, and I think it's just messy.
It is
because
messy.
because all of the things that we've identified can be solved by people like Adobe and Dropbox releasing new versions of their apps to support the Pro in a different for its specific use case, and then Apple updating iOS to kind of support that stuff. The problem is the Pro is obviously a niche device. So why are you going to build a custom version of your app that only 5 million people might use versus where like the previous benefit of iOS and Apple products is that generally, as long as you're supporting the right OS version, it's working on all devices. And there might be some minor scaling issues as they've, once they got to the, I guess the iPhone 6 level, like that's when screen resolutions and things kind of became a little bit more tricky than like one screen size, easy to use. But now we're really talking about, oh man, I have to build software specifically for the Pro for it to be useful. But most of my customer base won't be using the Pro. So am I going to invest the money in that?
Yeah.
It's like Apple's just created its own like niche market issue that, Samsung has when it's trying to push Tizen or its platforms or things like that. Like,
Well, I mean, Apple's benefited from scale with the App Store, and it's worked in Apple's favor for years because for most developers, it's the only place that they can make money. You know,
Yes.
Android has always been seen as the second fiddle, the place that, oh, okay, we already have a mature iOS product. Let's port it to Android. And the bigger companies obviously have a very robust Android strategy, and a lot of companies that have premium subscription tiers like Evernote or Todoist or Dropbox. These companies they require Android apps.
Yeah, because their monetization comes from their ubiquity and the subscriber, not specific app downloads.
Totally. And the Adobe model is the same. But when you look at, as you said, these kind of small indie developers, you know, Apple's created a market where they have to price their apps low, and they cannot release paid upgrades.
But I don't even know if it's small indie developers. Like, what incentive do some of the major developers have to really make pro products if they're not sure that their customers are there? Just because it's Apple? Like, you know, Apple has benefited from scale or like network effects for a very long time. And I think maybe they might take for granted that that's just going to naturally happen because it's Apple's ecosystem. And I think, you know, to keep pushing this conversation forward, another example of this is with the Apple TV, which is
I wanted to talk about that.
Basically running iOS. Like tvOS is like what they said, 95% iOS, with one major difference is that the way that it handles the actual applications radically changes whether or not developers want to support the platform, and not only the I guess the way that they're packaged, and then the initial download requirements, the way that the device handles app information is so radically different from everything that Apple has done so far with iOS, that a game that works perfectly well on a tablet or an iPhone, you might not see ported to Apple TV. That would work perfectly well on Apple TV because it's not worth the time and the attention to put in the effort to get it up there, unless Apple sells a junk ton of Apple TVs.
So, I really like I've been thinking a lot about this, and Apple sort of developed this app thinning model for Apple TV, which basically allows developers to create versions of the app that are optimized specifically for one device. But they've also created something called on-demand resources. And on-demand resources forces developers to only give users a smaller upfront download. So they've limited upfront downloads on the Apple TV to 200 megs. And then they will download assets as needed.
Up to 2 gigabytes, so, right?
Up to 2 gigabytes. And they can do that as many times as they want. Here's the problem with that. In the US, unlimited bandwidth is common on bigger companies. I mean, we know how many people hate Comcast and Time Warner Cable, but up until recently, Comcast's entire portfolio of high-speed internet packages came with unlimited data. Whereas in Canada, that is very different. And there's a big reseller of Rogers and Bell called TechSavvy, and they're just one example that I know of in Ontario.
Shout out TechSavvy!
That's a great company, but they limit you to 400 gigs on their main package, and it's inexpensive and it's great. But they only allow unlimited downloads between 2 and 8 a.m., which is crazy if you think about it, because if you are going to be pushing the type of app development where you can only download large swaths of data and files at a time where most people are going to be asleep, and every other time of the day when somebody's likely playing a game that, you know, has a few gigabytes of download, they're going to be worrying about their data usage.
Yeah, well, so not only
friendly.
Well, it's two things. You're not only are you constantly downloading assets, which can really take up the bandwidth of your home network, but you're constantly re-downloading assets because the Apple TV will just, if you haven't used something in a while, it'll just get rid of it. So maybe even if you only use like a certain few games and you have Netflix and things like that, and you have a regular use, you might be continuously re-downloading the same things over and over again. So even if you're wary about not what you download, but I guess what things you install, the
Mhm.
Apple TV, you could go way over your data cap just by like using it. So I'm a tech savvy customer. I've yet to get a notification from tech savvy saying, "Holy crap, you just bought an Apple TV, and we need to have a talk about what your price plan is." But I could for game heavy users, I could totally see that being the case.
Mhm.
There was another thing I want to talk about. And then also I think what we found out, shout out Renee Ritchie in his just intensive Apple TV review. The Apple TV doesn't support gigabit Ethernet, right?
Yeah,
So
it
you're
doesn't.
also continuously, instead of like kind of like downloading an asset and like having it and never having to worry, every time I launch Transistor, I got to wait for it to load. Which gets me to another problem, which is that these apps that are good that I know that I want to use, these games, kind of suck on the Apple TV right now. I haven't seen a lot of content released that I really want to consume, either because it's taking developers some time to refactor their code to support app thinning and the process, or maybe they're playing a wait and see, or because they're not going to support it, or because they're just bad. Like Transistor crashes all the time. Every time I load Transistor, or every time I launch Transistor, I have to watch a loading screen, and I know it's re-downloading assets. I'm basically watching the game reinstall every time I launch it. And the intention of app thinning and this whole process was for a lean back TV experience. Basically, when you click on something, it's there instantly. Like if you want to watch a TV show on Apple TV or things like that, it's super fast because it can just pre-buffer the content. But when you're like playing games and launching games, why am I watching a download screen all of a sudden? How is
Totally.
that better than the previous experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Like I have a new Apple TV and I like it, but it's one of those things where you have to have lower expectations. They have to go into it with lower expectations than I think I hoped for, because
Because the
I've heard
content's not.
I've heard the fact that, like, I mean, I got it a while after the reviews came out, but I heard the words dumpster fire used more than once to describe how the Apple TV's experience has been for a lot of people. And a lot of my friends have said that it's the best set-top box you can buy today, but that bar was pretty low to begin with.
Yes.
And where the Apple TV benefits from the ecosystem that Apple has laid the foundations for over the last 7 years, it's completely let down by the input. The fact that there's no remote app, you can't use your iPhone to input text. The input of text on the TV itself with the Siri remote is just awful. It's just a
Yeah.
really, really slow experience. And as you alluded, the Apple, the ecosystem that people take for granted on the iPhone and iPad is just not there yet on the Apple TV. There are a few gems. Shout out Snowman, who created Alto's Adventure, one of the best mobile games ever. Got ported absolutely beautifully to the Apple TV. I highly recommend you use it. Badland also got ported really well to the Apple TV. There's a bunch of other games. I haven't had the
Do
same
these
problem
games
with.
require a controller?
No, they don't. And these are
Well, no games require a controller, but do they
benefit
really?
from a controller? No, they don't. So these are infinite running games, in the sense that you don't actually do anything to move the protagonist forward. You just move him or her up or down with a click. So it's super simple. But because of that, the games are designed in such a way that they're still really fun, and they're actually fun because they're so simple. So
I don't want to play mobile games on my Apple TV. I want to play casual games and honestly old like 16-bit system games, like not AAA 3D action titles, but the old streamlined like gameplay focused games on my Apple
like
TV.
Mega Man.
And I'm not seeing that
Not
yet.
yet. You
And I
won't.
guess
You
I
won't.
thought it would be a lot quicker. I'm not sure why this is happening, but control again is an issue where I think Apple went back on uh, initially saying that you wouldn't have to support the Siri remote, and then saying it was a requirement. So multiple control uh,
Schemes.
schemes for games, which isn't that big of a deal. Like, to be honest, any PC developer is completely used to that, and even most console games have remapping of controls. But even a thing, and I'm going to harp on Transistor again because I think this is an example of, like, I have an Xbox 360. I didn't upgrade to next generation systems because I don't have the time to invest in AAA titles. But I love Xbox Live Arcade games, and I played the crap out of Bastion on my 360.
Right.
And the ability to, and Transistor didn't come out on 360 because they kind of moved on to the new generation. It doesn't require like the power of a new console. It's just that's where the market is. And I was super excited to play it. And playing it with that Siri remote is brutal.
Does it support tilt controls, or is it all just swipes and presses on the Siri remote?
It's all swipes and presses, but in a way, the way that they could have done it, which would have been turning, and people who are only listening to this, but if you can imagine turning the portrait Siri remote landscape, so you're using the swipe screen as a digital pad, and then the buttons as like AB on, like, I think a old school Nintendo controller,
Right.
would have been great. But having to use it in one hand, I'm always accidentally calling up Siri when I'm trying to push the buttons.
Right.
Like it doesn't work one handed. They're not using it like a controller, like an old school controller, and they're not using it like a Wii remote. And it's super frustrating. So beyond the fact that the game crashes every 20 minutes, and I have to watch it re-download assets, it's like I'm also, I guess, need to get a controller to play these games, which is okay, except for the fact that I'm not going to buy a controller to play mobile games. I'm not going to buy a controller to play Temple Run.
Yeah, and I think the Apple TV needs a hero product for that controller. It needs something to tell people, it needs a Call of Duty, essentially. Something to say,
and that Call of Duty could be Mega Man 2.
It could be. I mean, that's the irony, is that this would be such a great, what Nintendo kind of failed to do with the Wii and the Wii U in bringing back, its older 16 and 8-bit games.
There were some releases on the Wii store where you could play legit games. The pricing model was a little suspect, but the inventory was pretty good for classic Nintendo games. The problem was it didn't have anything like Xbox Live Arcade or what Sony was doing with indie game developers releasing stuff.
Yeah.
So like if I have an Apple TV that allows me to watch Netflix, TV, Center Ice, and then I can play games like Fez, Shovel Knight, Final Fantasy 2, and like some fun like multiplayer Crossy Road. That's exactly what I want on my sitting in front of like my home TV.
But here's the thing. I mean, we just talked about HD systems and how it doesn't really make a big difference when you have an Xbox or a PlayStation already connected to your receiver. The whole idea of like, yes, Apple should be your input one. It should be the main console you use for most things because it's got Netflix, it's got games, it's got NHL Game Center, it's got blah blah. But the reality is that there's still going to be reasons, in perpetuity to switch over to your Xbox and to your PlayStation, and your Wii. And if like it's so easy to play Mega Man 2 on another console, then why are we insisting that Apple goes there? Why are we insisting that developers go there?
Because the promise is that for the last 3 console generations, people have been buying, or I guess last 2 console generations, people have been buying hardcore video game consoles. Actually, even since the PlayStation 2, which was for a time the cheapest way to get a DVD player when DVD players were just coming out. Like, hey, you could buy a DVD player for like $200 or $250, or you could spend $300 and get a DVD player that plays games. People have been using their dedicated video game system as a way to do more broad consumer multimedia entertainment fun stuff, which is why when the Wii came out, it was the perfect price point and everyone picked it up. It just wasn't sustainable. Like the promise of the Apple TV is, you know, a better Wii, a Wii with all the benefits of Apple across all forms of media, not just gaming.
Right.
And I guess, it's been out for a month. It's just, I guess we're accustomed in the Apple environment, the iOS environment, to have that network effect. And I'm wondering, this is what, the 4th or 5th generation Apple TV to come out? I'm wondering, I thought this was the right time to get in on Apple TV. I'm wondering if next year's model is the right time, or if it's going to be a year before this really has the content to justify.
But I mean, so the promise of the Apple TV before it was actually released was this, invisible TV streaming service that's been promised from Eddie Q, or at least ostensibly promised from Eddie Q for a year now. And it's going to happen, right? There have been enough proven leaks to show that there is, there are talks between Apple and the content providers and the networks.
Mm-hmm.
But is that going to be? And I'm looking right now on Amazon. It's Black Friday. They're selling the PlayStation 4 500 gigabyte hardware bundle with the Nathan Drake collection for $370. Okay. So this is
$70 more than what I paid for the Apple TV.
Well, so it's not that. I mean, it's more than 70, right? It's one.
The final price for my Apple TV with shipping, or no, shipping was. So I bought the $250 Apple TV plus tax or whatever. It came out to like $309.
Right. So the Apple TV 32 gig is $199. The 64 gig is $269. So
yeah,
assuming most people choose $269, that's
$309.
That's $100 before tax difference between this little set-top box and a full-on console. And I mean, a lot of people have been making that same argument about the iPad versus a laptop. Why would you spend the same on an iPad Pro when you can get a full quote-unquote desktop computer for the same price? And it's going to take that ecosystem of content and apps to convince people switching over from a laptop to an iPad Pro, and it's going to take that same commitment from Apple to get that content onto the Apple TV to convince people that it's both
totally
television replacement or a cable box replacement and a console replacement, or even if it augments those things, whether it's worth $270.
Totally. Because the belief is predicated. It's predicated on the belief that Apple will do what it does when it comes to this stuff, so that you don't have to buy a game console to be your media set-top box, which is what tech-savvy people have been doing, or since PlayStation 2, since they could use it as a DVD player. Because if I have the choice between, I want to buy my parents something. They just want to watch. They want to get their iTunes show. They just want to get all their shows. They want to get Netflix and some other shows, and that's it. I'm definitely going to buy them an Apple TV or a set-top box, a simplified system, over a game console. Like PlayStation 4's UI compared to Apple TV's UI. Much easier for the broad consumer to navigate. They don't need all that. Sometimes you pay for the simplicity of not needing all that additional stuff, but that means that the content has to be there. And I've been pretty happy with the way Siri works and the navigation and the UI, but being more digitally savvy and the person who's looking to consume a lot of different types of content, it's not really there for me.
But I know a lot of olds that choose to buy Xboxes and PlayStations to play, NFL 16 or NBA Live, whatever, or just to get a racing game that they enjoyed, in their
so they have their
PlayStation 1
one
games.
hardcore game and then they use it for general stuff, right?
And I'm looking at the list of entertainment apps. You have Netflix, you have YouTube. In the US, you have Amazon and HBO Go and Dish and Vudu and MLB TV. But you also have things like Plex, and Plex is one of those Call of Duty like hero apps for the for the Apple TV that was released a few days after the console or the set-top box came out. And people love Plex, but Plex is not hard to get a hold of. It's kind of like Netflix in the sense that it's pretty much everywhere. And if you have a Plex server, you can find it on most screens. So, I'm thinking the value proposition of the Apple TV right now is unclear to me.
Well, you do get the iTunes store, right? So the easiest way for me as a Canadian without a cable subscription to watch the most recent episodes of TV shows that have just come out is to buy a season pass on Apple TV.
Right.
Right.
But you can do the same on PlayStation TV.
Well, so this is where, though, the support gets iffy because, prior to buying the Apple TV, I used my Xbox 360 for three things. I played the crap out of Destiny. I watched all the content I could on Netflix. And when it wasn't on Netflix, I'd have to go into the Xbox store. And the Xbox store is very hit and miss. It doesn't have it was better for movies than it was for TV shows. That might be different in the United States. But so then again, it's because I'm relying on a game console to secure all the media rights to TV shows and movies, which is something that Apple should be able to do better than Xbox or Microsoft or Sony.
Right.
Or at least put more attention into.
But not necessarily Sony, right? Because Sony does have that content. It owns a lot of the content from
it owns a lot of
movie
Sony
side,
content,
but
yeah.
And it's not. I mean, it's not necessarily comprehensive. But what Sony does have is it has a fairly mature ecosystem of. It has that content store where you can buy movies and rent movies and buy TV and rent TV. And iTunes is certainly better. There's no question. And Canadians don't have access to Amazon, so we don't have Prime TV and things like that.
Yeah. So we're not really missing out on Amazon's refusal to support because they don't support Canada in the first place. Although I will say, the one thing that really the problem with this stuff is being a Canadian, the fact that Bell basically bought HBO content until the end of time means that if I want to watch that stuff, I have to go through Bell, or I have to pay for it on iTunes a year after for a hefty price. Purchasing TV is really expensive depending on what you're watching.
Yeah.
And my girlfriend and I, as kind of new buyers for this stuff, have been trying to figure out what the equation is for the TV we're willing to pay for. 10 episode run, Mr. Robot for $18. Hells yeah, sign us up. We just did the Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, the BBC miniseries, was pretty cheap. Great. I want to watch the new season of Game of Thrones. That is mad expensive. My God, it's $40 for a season. If we haven't watched a show, are we going to put $200 in to just watch one TV show? Or hey, maybe we just
the price of a DVD.
I know. It's DVD pricing in a non-DVD age because I do not own that stuff.
But it's not a non-DVD age. It's you're looking at it from the perspective of.
So Daniel, directly above me are the 200 DVDs for a complete season of Lost, or complete series of Lost, a bunch of different movies and some other TV shows. First couple seasons of Mad Men before they started appearing on Netflix. My girlfriend just moved in. I'm going to get rid of that stuff, make some room, and make some of my investment back on that media I consumed. So I'm going to go sell that. How do I do that on iTunes?
Well, you can't, but you're not going to make a lot of money selling that media, and that media is going to get, the value of that media is going to go down, increasingly decrease. That's a terrible way of putting it. It's going to decrease even faster the longer you.
Hey, do you want to borrow my copy of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? I'll bring it to the office tomorrow. Do you want to?
I don't have anything to watch it on. That's the other thing.
Well, okay. Do you want to borrow my digital copy? You have an Xbox. You can watch on that. Do you want to borrow my digital copy of The Good and the Bad and the Ugly? Here, let me give you my login information for my iTunes account because I don't have sharing rights. there is still that, again, we've had this conversation before, usually around music, but like owning media is way better than renting media, especially when shows that I've watched and enjoyed, or movies that I've watched and enjoyed on Netflix, or maybe wanted to watch, aren't there anymore because the licensing agreements disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, all of a sudden it's like a million voices crying out in pain across the universe as Doctor Who is removed from Netflix in Canada.
Or on another tack, RDO, my favorite streaming service, disappears, and you're left with nothing to show for it. All of that data that they've been accruing over the years to make your recommendations more accurate, to give you to allow you to follow your friends and to build these social graphs within the network, playlists, they are completely gone.
Yeah.
So what do I have to show for spending hundreds of dollars on RDO over the last 3 years?
But my stack of CDs can play at any time. It's pretty great, man.
But
I'm gonna listen to some 90s can rock after this.
Great. So go ahead and put the CD you want to listen to on your phone into your CDR drive or whatever, and then rip it and then turn it into MP3s and then put it on your phone. Oh wait, you have nothing that can do that anymore.
Yeah, I do. I literally have a CDR over by my desk, and I have iTunes.
You don't have a computer that can read it, or very few people.
I'm running off. It's literally like $20 to. And yes, I did have to go get an optical drive to plug it into my MacBook Air.
Yeah.
But hey, it gives me the benefit of owning my media, and I have a lot of storage on my laptop. I have a lot of storage on my phone, and it's always there.
Right. You can do this. You have taken the time to do this. You, as somebody who lives
there is a time
200 DVDs.
Well, but it's also the reason why I buy music off of iTunes too.
Right. But so there was a reason that BuzzFeed wrote an article called "So You Bought the Adele CD, Here's How to Play It." And yes, it was tongue in cheek, but the reality is that because Adele is not streaming her CD on any service, people are going to have to go out and buy the CDs for the first time in years.
Yeah.
And many of the teens have nothing to play it on.
Don't even know what a CD is.
Ask their parents, what the hell do I do with this thing?
Yeah.
And the reality is that you get a digital download code when you buy her CD. So it's actually a better deal to go to Walmart and spend $10 on her CD and then download the MP3s from some DRM-filled website than actually go onto iTunes and spend $14 on it. So,
well, that's back to the problem then. It's just
like, I'm not disagreeing with you. I like physical media, but I don't think that there's anything solved by Apple. Still, like, Apple's App Store on the Apple TV it doesn't solve any of the problems that it sought out to ostensibly solve.
Well, because it doesn't own the media.
It doesn't own
being a gateway to media doesn't solve the problems that is inherent to media in the 21st century. And
that will continue to be a problem going forward.
We're talking about two things. The difference between just the physical media and digital media, and then owning the media and paying a license to own the media. And in my mind, the physical media, I'm just surrounded by paper books. Like, the physical media that I own provides me the versatility that I need.
And just to be clear, Adele's new album costs $11 Canadian.
Yeah, which is
pretty
a great
good
price for an album if you really like Adele. That's not, it's a generation of people just decided that they didn't want to pay for media anymore, and now things seem expensive relative to their actual value. But it's not really true.
I mean, there's an argument to be made that, like, the App Store model, which pushes prices down, has had a similar effect on the way that people perceive content from, like, artists. So, why should I spend $11 on a CD from iTunes when I can buy an app for 99 cents? And I know they don't correlate necessarily, but the idea of spending $11 on something that has no actual physical presence is lost on a lot of people.
Well, but I think you're halfway there. But I don't think it's the app comparison. I think it's the initial way that iTunes was set up is like, why would I pay $11 for the album when I only want these 3 tracks and I can buy them for $3? And then once you're used to only buying individual tracks, why don't I just sign up for this service that has all the tracks that I want and that I don't care about albums anymore?
Right, but the tracks themselves, I mean, so as much as the iTunes store opened up the idea of the single and being able to buy whatever tracks you wanted, they're still heavily incentivizing the purchase of an entire album, right? Because you can buy, you know, I can buy Hello and Send You My Love or whatever. I miss, like, the first 3 songs on Adele's album cost half of the entire 11 song.
Yeah, totally. CD. And even with the DVD pricing, they're still, to a certain degree, when it comes to the TV shows, incentivizing getting the full season versus a la carte. Although they do a cool thing where if you've bought like the first 2 episodes of a show to see if you like it, and you buy the season pass, they deduct the price that you've paid to the full price, which is something that I appreciate. So you're not like repaying for the stuff that you already bought.
Right. Not to mention the fact that with Apple Music now integrated into iTunes, when you quote unquote own a CD, it doesn't differentiate anymore between the content that you own and the content that you're subscribing to on Apple Music.
Well, yeah, okay, let's not even get into the giant cluster cuss that is integrating a streaming music service over top of a digital media file storage system and the issues that has happened in blending, which it invariably would. But like, just, you know, to be more poignant of it, I'm talking about how I like buying music that I really want on iTunes or getting it on vinyl in the digital copy or a physical book. I bought 2 physical books yesterday at Eaton Center just because I was like, hey, I like that TV show that I bought on iTunes. I want to read the 700-page book. I signed up for Apple Music and I don't think I've used it for the past 2 months, and that just cost me $20. And like, not only have I like forgotten about Apple Music, I kind of forgot I was paying for it.
I got to read your credit card statements.
Oh, that way leads to madness, sir. We don't read them. We just ignore them and change address once a year.
So I mean, we've kind of gone a little bit long based on the topics that we wanted to talk about. We wanted to get to a few more things today that I think we'll leave for next week. Wait,
we're going to podcast every week? That sounds crazy.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to promise anything, because I think the last time I actually did that, we didn't pod for another month. But I do want to say that next week we're going to have our dear friend Amanda Costco on the show to talk about the state of wearables.
Sweet.
And Amanda is a great person, and I guess she's the owner / progenitor of Electric Runway, which covers fashion check. Founder, yeah. CEO, VIP of Electric Runway, which is a company that kind of takes part in / covers the emerging fashion and tech world and how they're converging. So she'll be on next Friday, and we're very happy to have her. But we're also going to talk in the spirit of wearables about Apple Pay and about how it works on the Apple Watch and a few other things. So we're going to leave it there for today. If you listen, thank you so much for being here. Douglas, we don't do this enough. Where can people find you on the internet?
People can find me at Tron, Tron. Just flaming hot tweets all day. Mostly retweets of BetaKit content, betakit.com, where we're covering Canadian startups and tech innovation, the scenes behind the scenes of Canadian tech.
All the hotness. You guys have been killing it lately.
Kyle Lowry, Player of the Month, book it.
My name is Daniel Bader. You can find me on Twitter at JourneyDan, mobilesyrup.com. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next week.
Shout out Jeff Broussard, and it feels so good.